So my name is Tim Klein. Really excited to be here. And before we get in, a part of this is I really want to give you a high-level overview of the research that we do. I want you to personalize it. So it's like, yes, here's what the research says. Everyone likes saying, well, the evidence says, but I'm going to give you a chance to be like, well, is this personally relevant to me? And then the goal is to give you some takeaways, tools, tactics, strategies that you can use right now to be implementing this. So we're not just doing pie in the sky things. It's going to be a very personal journey where you're going to get to know each other. So I'm just going to start with one question for you all, where you're going to do a talk and turn with the person next to you. What is the story of your name? How did you get your name, and what is the story of your name? So just do a talk and turn on that question right now. We're going to get into all the research on what I do. I do research on purpose and belonging, but at the end of the day, the most simple, powerful thing you can do is purpose. Like, when I talk about my purpose, it's when you are talking about something that matters to you with someone who makes you feel like you matter, that is purpose and belonging in practice. And so I saw so much of it here already. I saw people attuned, they were nodding, you were mirroring body language. Like, at the end of the day, that's where purpose and belonging comes from, and it doesn't have to be very difficult. But let's get into the big picture. So Leslie gave me this very, very nice introduction. My name is Tim Klein. I'm a clinical social worker by trade. I graduated from University of Chicago. I was a teaching fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where I was preparing educational leaders to go into the field. I helped launch a social emotional learning organization called Wayfinder that now serves hundreds of thousands of students all over the United States and the world. And I am a professor at Boston College. And so this tells some story, right? I have all of these fancy credentials next to my name. And so you're starting to form you're starting to form a story about who this person is, right? I'm putting this up here not to brag, but because this tells one story, but this is not actually my story. And I'm actually going to start with my story to show you where I actually come from. So my story actually begins right there. So that is me in high school. Not only is that me in high school, that is my senior year photo right there. Yeah, exactly. So that's how I decided to show myself to the world as I was graduating high school and becoming an adult. And so this pretty much sums it up. I was very loud. I mean, you can hear my voice. I was very self-centered. I was obnoxious. I only cared about myself. And there was a moment in time I'll never forget, my senior year of high school. So I'm from central Vermont, very progressive place. It's known for being hippies. The coolest thing you could do in central Vermont when I was growing up was be in the theater, be in the drama department. And so I'm in this class, British authors, with the teacher who's the coolest teacher in the high school. She also runs the theater department. And she's going around to all the seniors at the end of the year saying, where are you all going to college? And everyone's going around out loud. I'm in this class as well saying, where are you going to college? She gets to her student, Ben. Ben is her very favorite student. He's this tall, handsome guy, very thoughtful, very reflective, very articulate. He's also the main actor in all of her plays. And she gets to Ben, and she says, Ben, where are you going to college next year? I can say the name of the college because it doesn't exist anymore. But he says, I am going to Johnson State College, which was in northern Vermont. And she takes a beat, she pauses, she looks at him, and she says, why would you go there? A bunch of Tim Kleins go there. And yeah, and I'm in the room saying that. Yeah, and what was she saying there? She's saying, you are this kind-hearted, very thoughtful, creative person. Why would you go to a school with a bunch of loud, obnoxious, self-centered, shallow dudes like Tim? And that was a real inflection point for me, because I'm in that room and I'm like, how do I make sense of this? What do I do with this information? And it was that moment where this was a moment where it's like, is she right? Is this who I am as a person? And I can either accept that she's right, I can either reject it and say, you don't know me, that's not my story, or I can do a third thing, which is what I ended up doing. I said, you don't get to decide who I am, I do. But if I'm seen as a loud, obnoxious asshole, to be pardoned my French, I'm gonna own it. And that's unfortunately what I did. So I just doubled down on it. I go to Ithaca College for sports, media, and marketing, literally because when picking a college, I was like, I don't want to be in Vermont. So I go to upstate New York, which is exactly like Vermont. And then I don't know what to study. And I literally go, I don't know. I like sports. And so I study sports media and marketing. Spoiler, I'm a clinical therapist now. I don't do a ton with sports media and marketing. And so I go to college. I was a tennis player. I joined the tennis team. We win a conference championship. We set a school record for wins in a season. I immediately quit after my freshman year because it's getting in the way of my partying, to be quite honest. I was very much living in the moment. I only cared about what was right in front of me, and that's the only thing I cared about. I was the student in college who, if I liked what you were doing, I was sitting there, I was raising hand, I was engaged. But like, if I was in a class and I didn't understand how this was relevant to me, I was the one who had my hoodie up. I was in the back. I had actually trained myself. This was before computers were like everywhere. I trained myself to be able to fall asleep and have my hand moving like it looked like I was writing. I was that student. So I was the one you would hate in class or you loved because I was either into it or not. And so I don't do anything in college at all until my senior year, when I realized there's the Student Government Association and no one is running for student body president. So I decide to run for student body president, and this is what I look like in college when I'm doing that. Yeah. Yeah, it gets worse. So this is student government. We run, it's called, the name of the student government, you run as a party. And so we were the party. And it was Tim Helps Everyone Party. So I was running on like a George Bush, who would you rather drink a beer with type of candidacy. We win in a landslide. We set a school record for it. And so I'm still the same person. The only smart thing I did at this time was I had amazing people behind me. Like we have Nivi Mukherjee, who's one of the most innovative ed tech pioneers in Kenya right now. Right next to her is Lane Tobias and Dan McCary, who are both civil rights lawyers in New York. Like I had this amazing team around me, and they did amazing work to actually do really, really impactful thing with student government. And so at the end of the year, the Ithakid, which is the very prominent, one of the best school newspapers in the country, they write an article about the party, and they're like, wow, student government was really effective this year. And this is what they titled the name of the article. So this is an article about how effective our student government was. But look at the title. No joke. Why did they choose that title? Because I was a joke. I viewed myself as a joke, and I put that out there into the world that I was like, I'm a joke. College is a joke. Life is a joke. That was the story I was telling myself. So I didn't say it explicitly, but obviously people picked up on the story I was telling, right? So I graduate from college. I have no idea what I want to do. And a friend of mine says, hey, my brother will let us crash on his couch in Chicago for free until we find a job. So I say, great. We moved to Chicago. That's the only reason. I get to Chicago and I start working at ESPN Zone. Does anyone know ESPN Zone? Yeah, so Ithaca College has graduated the most number of people who work at ESPN, like Carl Ravitch, Sal Paolantonio. So many people who work at ESPN have come from Ithaca. And so everyone at home, they're like, oh, you're working at ESPN Zone. You must be working at ESPN. No, this is a chain restaurant where people go to like watch sports there. And so I was a waiter there, which is a very hard job, very good job. But like, so my parents would be like, people would come to my parents and be like, oh, Tim's working at ESPN. And they weren't very quick to correct them on that I was working there. But so I'm working at ESPN Zone, and then I'm reading this book because I'm in Chicago called There Are No Children Here. And this is a book about young people growing up. You know the book? Yeah. Yeah. Amazing book about young people growing up in Chicago in the late 80s. And there's this one little line in there about, during a time of a lot of violence in that city, the Boys and Girls Club was this safe haven for them. And I was like, what? I had always taught tennis growing up. I've always been a really goofy guy. And that's worked really well with kids. I'll go volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club. I show up at this volunteer position, and I don't know why, but I say, do you have a job I could have? I just asked them at a volunteer. And the guy looks at me, and he's like, I do have a job. And there was a games room coordinator position open up at the Daniel A. Cotter Club in Chicago. So I get a job at the Daniel A. Cotter Club, which is in the Julia C. Lathrop Homes, the oldest public housing development in Chicago. And so I'm from Vermont originally. And Vermont is the whitest state in the country, 98% white. I go to upstate New York, which is not a bastion of diversity either. And then I'm going to this historically black neighborhood and I'm still glow in the dark white. And now I'm entering this black neighborhood where I've never been around black people before, to be perfectly frank, just because I was from Vermont. And I'm working there. And it's the most transformative experience I've ever had, to be honest, because they were so gracious in letting me into their community. So this is me working there. And I start working with these students. So I'm in the games room. I'm organizing pool tournaments. I'm making sure they're not breaking ping pong paddles. I'm helping them with their homework. And I'm 22 at this point, but I'm meeting these students. And they remind me, even though we couldn't have had different backgrounds, they remind me of my friends growing up. They had the same humor, same ambition, same creativity. And I was like, man, like this actually reminds me of my friends. The only difference was, I'm growing up and it's just assumed that you go to college. Everyone's going to college. It isn't a question. I'm seeing students with so much potential, so much ability, and their outcomes were very, very different. These students were not graduating from high school. They were not going to college. And the reason being is my second year at this Boys and Girls Club, 185 Chicago public high school students got shot that year. Not people in the city, students in Chicago public schools got shot. So I was skipping school because I wanted to play Dreamcast growing up. They were not going to school because they were literally afraid for their safety going there. And it really embarrassed me to say this, but this was the first time in my life where I started caring and seeing other people's perspective. It made me realize that me seeing my life as a joke, me treating myself as a joke, was a privilege that I had that I wasn't even aware of. Because I was working with people who couldn't afford to take life as a joke because life was and felt life or death for them. And the most transformative moment I had was in the Boys and Girls Club. They have this thing called the Youth of the Year competition. And the Youth of the Year competition is where someone gets to stand up and give a speech where they tell their story and they tell about how the Boys and Girls Club helped them reach their goals. And I had the opportunity to work with our youth, Crystal, who is this amazing, amazing young woman who is doing everything right. And I got to sit down with her and help her tell her story. When I sat down with her, and we're thinking about what is your story, she opens up to me about things in her life that she had never told anyone before. And on the surface, everything looked perfect for her. She was a 4.0 GPA, doing everything right. But then under the surface, I'm not going to get into specifics. She had a lot of trauma that she had been going through all on her own, never had been talking about it before. Crystal goes on. We help tell that story. She wins the Chicago Youth of the Year, the Illinois Youth of the Year, the Midwest Youth of the Year. And then she goes on and gets a full scholarship to the CIA, not like the CIA, but the Culinary Institute of America. And this is Crystal, who's an award-winning chef in New York City right now. Beautiful story, right? Beautiful story, right? Unfortunately, Crystal is an exception, not the norm in this neighborhood, right? And I was like, there are so many Crystals out there who I was working with who have much different outcomes. And so I'm getting better as a person. I'm still very young, dumb, and naive. And so I'm like, oh, you know, I had all these privileges because of the system I was growing into. These students are like, their outcomes are impacted by their system. I should just go change the system then. And so I saw all these housing issues, criminal justice issues. So at that point, I decided to go to University of Chicago, where I'm going to study social service administration. I'm going to be a social worker. I'm going to study issues around extreme poverty. I was like, I'll just fix the housing issue in Chicago. Easy peasy. Turns out not that easy. But so I'm bouncing. And so this is the first time in my life I'm genuinely like something changes in me because I'm realizing other people's issues. I'm realizing the privilege that I had, and I want to pay that forward. I want to see how can I help make change for the better. And I struggle, honestly. I work at Heartland Alliance, where I was doing advocacy around extreme poverty. That involved a lot of data, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of advocacy work, and I didn't feel like I was a math person. I was working with non-custodial fathers at the Center for New Horizons who were trying to get custody of their students back. I just bounced around from, do I work with people or do I change systems? Do I work with people or try to change systems? And eventually, I graduate from University of Chicago. I don't know what I want to do at this point because I've done a lot. I get a call from an old college buddy. He says, hey, I'm in Boston. You can come crash on my couch until you find a job here. And I say, you know what? That's worked for me in the past. I move to Boston. I stay on his couch until I get a job at Summer Search. So Summer Search is a national youth development nonprofit that gives full scholarships for experiential summer trips to urban youth. So basically, you're a sophomore in high school. We're going to give you a full scholarship to do an Outward Bound or a Knowles trip. You're going to spend 3 weeks in the Teton Mountains or the Boundary Waters of Minnesota. And they're doing this as college prep. And I started working with these students doing mentoring, where I was working with students, checking in with them as a mentor every single week from their sophomore year of high school all the way till they graduate from high school and on into college. And when I was doing this work, I was meeting a whole bunch of crystals. Meaning I was meeting these young people who had these amazing stories about what they wanted to do, and they knew why they wanted to do it. And in Summer Search students, there's no academic preparation. There's no college readiness, really. I never talked about homework with my students. Summer Search students, low income, first gen, all of them, they're graduating from college at 5 times the rate of their peers. 5 times the rate of their peers, they're graduating from 4-year college. And what I realized, it's because of the story they're telling themselves about who they are, what they want to do, and the role that college plays in it. So I was like, to me, this was a light bulb moment for me where I was like, the story people tell themselves about what they want to do can play a really big role in their ability to overcome challenges. And then I had this realization that I would have never applied to this program if I was young. I was the one who would never have done anything like this. And I was like, I want to go work with the students who never would apply to this program, who didn't know what their story was. And so I decided to go to Medford High School as a guidance counselor. So I'm at Medford High School as a guidance counselor, and I'm obsessed with understanding people's stories. So my students are coming into my room and they're like, I need a work permit. I need to change my class. Can you write me a letter of recommendation for my college essay? And I'm like, who do you want to be in life? Where do you want to go? Tell me your story. And I would just blindside them with these questions about what is your story? And I was just doing that because that's just what I knew how to do. It turns out when I'm at Medford High School, Dr. Belle Liang, who's the co-author of the book in front of you, who is the preeminent expert on youth mentoring and purpose at Boston College, she's doing a longitudinal study with Harvard University and Boston College about the role of mentoring and purpose. So she's going around to every single student in our high school being like, which adult in here is asking you questions about life? Which adult in here is really taking a genuine interest on who you are and what you want to do in the future? I'd only been at the school for 4 months, but over and over, Mr. Klein, Mr. Klein, Mr. Klein. And I'm not saying that like I was doing anything special. It's just because I had decided I'm going to take space to understand people's stories. And I created that space. And I wasn't doing anything special, but the high school, the systems we're in, there's no space. Students don't have any space for that type of reflection normally. So that's why it felt like what I was doing was so out of the ordinary. When I meet Belle, I learned about her research, and this was another inflection point for me because Belle does research on purpose. And so purpose, it's called youth purpose. It was defined by Dr. Bill Damon, who ran the Center on Adolescent Research at Stanford University. The definition of purpose is living a life that's personally meaningful with an intention to contribute to the world beyond the self. So there's 3 major ingredients to purpose. It's having some sort of future orientation, something in the future that you're working towards that is personally meaningful, and you also feel like it contributes to the world beyond the self, even if that's just one other person, your family, community, society. When students, so you've had these students with a sense of purpose are the ones, they have a goal in the future, it's personally meaningful to them, they genuinely feel like it's going to have a positive impact, and it's education dependent, meaning they can see how doing well in your classes serves as a stepping stone to reaching that goal. When you look at the research on those students, it's almost a magic bullet. So what do we know about purpose? Purpose leads to success and happiness. So people with a sense of purpose in what they do. So I'm sitting here, you all are all purposeful. You wouldn't be here if you weren't purposeful. So if I say, is your work personally meaningful? Do you feel like you're meeting critical needs? Do you feel like you're making a positive impact? If you say yes to that, people with a sense of purpose have lower levels of depression and anxiety, lower levels of PTSD. Here's the kicker about that. People with a sense of purpose have more objective stress in their life versus people without a sense of purpose. A big criticism in the purpose work is like, oh, purpose is this privilege for people who don't have to worry about anything. No, People with a sense of purpose have more stress. The difference is that when you have purpose, it changes your relationship to stress. If you have a purposeful goal, you tend to see stress as the motivation you need to pursue big, audacious goals. And so people with a sense of purpose realize, oh, I'm stressed because I am trying to go do something important. And what we found is that purpose, it works as a psychological inoculation against the negative impacts of stress. So you have lower levels of cortisol in your system when you are feeling purposeful about what you're doing, which leads to better mental health outcomes. It's not just mental health though. People with a sense of purpose get sick less, are less likely to go to the hospital, are more likely to live longer, are less likely to die. This is not some Pollyanna woo-woo, you just have to manifest it. They've done research where they went and looked at people who had third-degree burns all over their body. And they went and they interviewed them and said, why is it important for you to get healthy and to get out of the hospital? They found that people who had a purposeful reason to recover were generating white T blood cells at higher rates than the people who didn't have a sense of purpose in recovering. So purpose has a physiological impact on our body that impacts our physical health. And then finally, the kicker here is that students with a sense of purpose, they're more self-directed, they're more engaged in the classroom. They have better relationships with their peers, better relationship with faculty, more likely to graduate high school, more likely to graduate college, more likely to be thriving in their careers. Literally, purpose is correlated with every indicator of well-being that you can find. So where we are in the research right now is we know purpose when we see it. You all, I'm sure, have had purposeful students in your classes. Those students are driven towards something. They overcome obstacles. They're doing it with grace. Like, you've all worked with students who had a lot of purpose. You've also worked with students who didn't have purpose, right? You've worked with a student who had all the ability, potential in the world. And no matter how much you banged your head against the wall, you just couldn't get it to click with them. Correct? I know you all have had that, right? So the research is like, we know purpose when we see it and we know the outcomes. There wasn't a lot of research on how do you cultivate purpose? How can we actually help people develop purpose? I saw that as an opportunity. So Belle and I, we worked together. I came to her with this ridiculous 20-page outline of an intervention I wanted to do. And Belle took a chance on me to be like, let's take evidence-based best practices in purpose and let's see what happens when we bring it to the classroom. And this is what it looked like. We ran a program called Empower at Medford High School. And this was no homework. I didn't have an attendance policy. I didn't grade them. What I was doing is I was creating space for them to intentionally be thinking about their lives around our elements of purpose. And we did a randomized controlled study on the impact of this program. And what we found was that students who had gone in our program, they were more likely to say they had higher levels of sense of purpose. They had higher levels of a growth mindset. Their GPAs increased, and they were statistically significantly much more likely to graduate and go on to college as a result of the program. And this is one of the first interventions that have been shown to actually cultivate sense of purpose in students. So we knew we had something here. And then our thought was, how do we get this out to more people? Because what we were doing wasn't rocket science. So that's when at Macmillan, the amazing people at St. Martin's Press, they helped us to write this book, How to Navigate Life. I know it's an audacious title here for a book, but that's you need that to sell them. But essentially what this book is for parents, honestly. St. Martin's actually told us the population who buys this book is called the worried well. It is the parents who have a lot of privilege and resources, and they're just worried about every single thing that their students are doing. The low key thing, the message that a parent like that will get is like, chill out and let your kid figure it out ultimately. But so we wrote this book, and working with our amazing editor, Elizabeth at St. Martin's, and in doing the research, we realized that there is a hidden crisis going on among our students called what we call the college and career navigation crisis. Meaning students are coming to college, they're taking more AP classes, their standardized test scores are higher than they've ever been, they're doing more work, they're doing everything right, and then something curious is happening when they get to college. They have no idea what they want to do or how to do it. And I would just say, I've worked on both ends. I've worked in middle, high school, college, post-grad. In high school, it's like cafeteria line, where it's just like they can pick between like full full fat milk and 2% milk. And that's basically the only options that they get. They have like one of three options. Are you taking, honors or AP? They don't have a lot of options. Then they come to higher ed. And what is higher ed? All you can eat buffet, right? Look at all of these amazing opportunities about you. You just need to go do what you want. We've never taught young people how to meaningfully decide for themselves what they want. And as a result, they're not accessing all the amazing resources that higher ed has to offer. And so here are some stats just to show you. So 51% of college graduates regret a major college decision. What that means is they regret the college that they went to, the major that they chose, or the career field that they went into upon graduation. That's 51% of graduates feeling that way. 66% do not feel ready to enter the workforce, saying they don't feel like they have the skills ready to be successful there. That's not just like young people wanting to not take responsibility and grow up and be adults. Only about 1 in 10 employers say that students are graduating with the skills that they're looking for. 43% are underemployed upon graduation, meaning they're taking jobs that don't require a college degree. I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily. I didn't even say it, but my first job out of college I was Mr. Dingling. I was an ice cream truck driver. Yeah, in Burlington, Vermont. Great job. I was the best. I was the highlight of every kid's day. It was an amazing job but the challenge with that is that if you start your career underemployed, you're 5 times more likely to remain underemployed 5 years later. So it can set you on a trajectory that's very hard to get out of unless you have a lot of resources to be able to do that. And finally, 75% feel their college experience wasn't relevant to their work or personal lives. This should be ringing the alarms for higher education right here, this personal relevance, because personal relevance is the strongest variable that's correlated with, did you feel like your college was worth the price of admission? And would you recommend someone go to your college? So when people feel that it's personally relevant either to their work or personal lives, that's when they say it was worth the price of admissions. That's when they would recommend it. So if only 1 in 4 students are saying that, that's a problematic trend that we're seeing. So in our book, I'm not going to get into it now, but we have this thing called the purpose compass, which is the elements of purpose. And Leslie alluded to it, but basically in our book, we help people. So purpose is within, it's not an external thing, but basically we help people identify the strengths that make them their best selves, the universal human skills they want to develop, the needs in the world that they want to be meeting, the problems that they want to be solving, and the values that they want to be making decisions for. So purpose at the end of the day, I'm going to sit here and just ask you right now, do you feel like you're using the strengths that make you your best self when you show up into work? Are you developing skills that you're really motivated to learn and master? Do you feel like you're making a positive impact? And do you feel like you're doing this in a way that aligns with your core values? And so if you're saying yes to this, and I'm guessing if I did, you wouldn't be here otherwise, you are using purpose to navigate your career and life. The problem is, how do we get students to understand what their strengths are? What skills do they want to develop? What values do they want to stand for? What needs do they care? The challenge is helping people to identify these things. And so I say all this, but what is purpose really? I'm talking fast. I'm throwing a lot at you. What is purpose really? Purpose, it's a story. That's all it is. And purpose is a story that connects the past, present, and future in a meaningful way. And so that's all that purpose does. It connects past, present, and future in a meaningful way. We're going to practice it right now, okay? You're not going to do a talk and turn because this question's hard. But here's what I mean by the story. Why are you here? Why are you in this room? Why are you at this conference? Why are you at your college? Why do you do what you do? I want you to take a sec to be like, why am I here? And I want you to take a sec. What comes to mind when I ask you that question? Why are you in higher education? Again, I'm not going to make you, this is not a quiz or anything, but I want you to think about it, right? Some of you, instant answer. You know exactly why you're here. You know exactly how this plays a role. You know exactly what role it plays in this story. Other of you, struggling with it a little bit. You're like, I don't know why I'm here. I'm struggling. I don't know. And so if you're struggling with that story, or someone, if your students are, what would happen if you asked that to your students who are in your introduction to economics or your biochem. Like, why are you here? If they're struggling to answer that story, the good news is that purpose is a practice. We can actually cultivate this to start crafting our own stories. And I'm getting really sick of hearing my voice, so we're going to start doing that now. So practicing purpose involves 3 steps. There are 3 steps. So one is dreaming, it's thinking about the future, dreaming big. That's step 1, creating space to do that. The next part, though, is looking back on the past. Oftentimes with students, we get them, what are your goals? What are your SMART goals? Like, what are you working towards? We also need to have time to understand the past, to understand how has the past informed those future goals. And then finally, we need to be thinking about being present, acting with intention. And what purpose is, it's a story that connects our past, our present, and our future. When we feel like our past is led into what we're doing now, and we have idea what we want to do in the future, that it gives our lives a sense of coherence. It gives them a sense of meaning. We have more purpose there. So we're going to do it right now. Are we ready? So we're going to practice it right now. I'm going to ask you a question. I'd love to get you to get out a piece of paper if you can. I'm going to give you 2.5 minutes to answer this question. Here's the goal. Here's the goal with this. It actually doesn't matter where you even write. You're not even going to keep what you're writing because I'm going to ask you a big question, and for 2.5 minutes, you are going to write without stopping. You are not thinking and then writing. I don't want to see like, thinking and then doing this. You are not stopping. That pen should not be stopping. I don't care about grammar. I don't care about run-on sentences. You're not going to be reading this out loud to anybody. You are writing to figure out what you think about this question, okay? So do not start writing until I say, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to ask you this question. I'm going to get the deer in the headlights, and you're going to be like, I can't write for that long. What you're going to find is that every word on the paper, the next word gets a little easier. Then the next word gets a little easier. And suddenly you have some momentum there. So are we ready for this? Okay, I know, okay, so the question is, how do you want to be remembered? You can take that as, and starting right now, how do you want to be remembered? You can be as a person, as a professor, as a professional. I do not care. I just want you writing, how do you want to be remembered? I hate to do it, but that's time. I knew I was excited to be in here because I saw so many people fully engaged, and it hurts to get you stop right there. And I'm not surprised because that's why you're in this room right here, because you're willing to do that type of work and you really do engage in that question. I do want you to think about, what if I had asked that question to start? And instead of what's the story of your name, you say, okay, talk in turn, how do you want to be remembered? Go with the person next to you, right? Harder to answer this question. We're a little bit more nervous to answer this question. Why? Because we're never given intentional space to really do that type of work. And what you actually did right there is called prospection. We hear about reflection, retrospection all the time. The science of intentionally thinking about the future is called prospection. And research shows that when people intentionally practice prospection, a funny thing happens. They have more pro-social intentions, which is just a fancy way of saying they tend to write about the positive impact that they want to make on other people. Did you all write about the impact that you're trying to make in your work or as a person? I'm guessing you did. So the research shows is that when you get people to intentionally think about the future, not only do they say they want to be more pro-social, afterwards, they act in more pro-social ways. They actually do things where they're working to help other people. And in the world of purpose, remember, purpose is doing something that's personally meaningful that contributes to the world beyond the self. It's having a pro-social intention. So one other thing about this, so you actually didn't write about yourself, you wrote about your future self. And in neurology, they've actually found that we tend to think about our future selves as different people. And so when it comes to this, in the Science of the Future, they ask people, out of all of these, which one best represents you? So some people, the current self and that aspirational self that you just wrote about, they feel like completely different people. Like that is someone who I am not right now. For other people, the future self, how you want to be remembered, feels almost the same as who you are now. It feels very connected to who you are, and you feel like that's the same person. Research shows that when we feel connected to our future selves, when you feel like truly I am that future person, You practice long-term decision making. You're not just in the present moment like I was when I was in college. You're actually like, I'm going to turn into that future self. So I'm going to make decisions to hook that person up. And what does that mean? It means you delay rewards, you eat healthier, you act more ethically, you spend less and save more. When students feel connected to their future selves, the research shows they do more schoolwork, they study more often, they actively engage in career planning, they follow health and safety guidelines, and they cheat and procrastinate less. And so it's not just about having a future goal. You can't just say like, what do you want to do? Because you've all had those students who say, I want to be a doctor, I want to play in the NBA. And they say these future goals that you're like, you're not even on the basketball team, you know, or like you're not even in pre-med, or you're not even doing your homework in your intro to math. How are you even saying that you want to be? Because they're not even feeling connected to their future at all. But so the more we can get people feeling connected to their future, I mean, do you want people who do more schoolwork, cheat less, and do all of those things? So we're going to do one more activity for you now. Let's go back to the future. What can we actually be doing to feel more connected to our future selves? So the answer that you all just wrote, you all want to be remembered for the strengths or virtues that make you your best self. What you actually just did right there, you were like, you started to identify the words you hope people use at your funeral. Not to get too morbid here, but that is what we were doing. Well, it turns out there's been, in positive psychology, a ton of research on virtues and character strengths. So what are the character strengths you want to be remembered for? So there's 3 types of character strengths. There's strengths of heart. So virtues and hearts that are all about how do you interact with other people. So do you want to be remembered as someone who was grateful, kind, loving, a leader, someone who has social intelligence? Do you want the strengths to be remembered for how you engage with other people? For some people here, it's all about strengths of the mind. You want to be creative, curious, have good judger, spiritual, be wise. And for some, it's strengths of spirit. You know, it's these intrapersonal skills that you have. Courage, fairness, zest. So I want you to do a talk and turn right now with the person next to you. Of these strengths, which strengths feel essential to who you are as a person? Meaning, which strength here is a signature strength where it's like, you wouldn't know me if you didn't know how important hope, humor, leadership, zest, whatever it is. What strengths energize you when you use them? Of these strengths, when you're using these strengths, which of them fill your bucket versus drain it? And then also, if you want, what strengths do you aspire to use more of? Like you see strengths up here where you're like, I wish I was more of that and I want to be more intentional in trying it. So do a talk and turn right now with the person next to you. Like what strengths up here resonate with you based on those 3 criteria? Go ahead.
We can go on.
I want you to go deeper here. I'm going to give you more time, but the question becomes, why these strengths? You know, you can say kindness or zest, but why? Each one of you actually identified different strengths. And if you picked the same strength, you did it for different reasons. So this is why it's as important, not just to think about the future, but to understand those strengths, we have to look to the past. And so what I want you to do right now, I'm going to run through this whole thing and give you a couple minutes to go through. We're going to look back now. And so on our journey, we know where you want to end up, right? You want to end up remembered for a legacy of using the strengths that you want to be remembered for. But what started that journey? Like why those strengths? What started the journey here? And so what I want you to be talking about now is what caused you to embark on your vocational journey? Like what caused you to start this journey that got you to this place? And really what I mean by what change of setting or turn of events sparked your call to adventure to enter into education as your vocation, right? Because none of you just like were born and being like, I'm going to be in an ed tech conference and be in higher education. So, something had to have happened that started this journey for you. So I want you to be talking about that. And then through it, I want you to be talking about the high points. So successes, milestones, goals you've had, and also the low points, the challenges, the obstacles that you've experienced. I also want you to be thinking about what were the inflection points you had. So like some of you started off loving education. You're like, I always wanted to be a teacher. And you started off high, but then things happen where we dip low on it. Or some of you started low and I was an accountant or I was in corporate America and I hated it, and then you had this insight and it changed the trajectory of your journey. So what are the relationships like Joanne, my teacher in high school, or my Crystal or Belle? What were the experiences and the people that changed the trajectory? And then what moments of insights have you had? So we'll go there. Couple minutes, like start just having a story about what started your journey, successes, obstacles, what changed it. Couple minutes to have that conversation here about the vocational journey. Go ahead. So I hate to cut this off, but I also am realizing you have another day and a half together here. And but I also want to encourage you to start telling these stories. And as you are engaging with each other in this amazing community that Macmillan has created for you, take time to be asking these questions when you're getting to know people. Like, what started your journey? What are the roadblocks? Start trying to tell your story more and start asking people about their story. And the reason I'm doing this is because, remember, purpose is a story, and stories connect the dots. A story, at the end of the day, is cause and effect. That's all the story is. A story is something that explains cause and effect. And so very recent research has shown that when people view their life as a hero's journey, what we call the seeker's journey, just to make it less like individual and patriarchal, but like the hero's journey is like you started off in your ordinary person in an ordinary world. You had a call to adventure that pushed you out of your comfort zone to become an educator. You had highs, you had lows, you had nemesis, you had rivals, you had mentors, you had allies, and eventually you changed over time. In every good story, the seeker always changes and they come back to their original world, but they're coming back a different person, someone who has grown over time. The research shows that when people think about their journeys as this hero's journey, they say their life is more purposeful and it's more meaningful. What's most interesting is that when you get people, ask them questions to get them thinking about their life in this sort of way, it leads to more purpose in life. So how are you crafting your story? How can you think about helping your students be crafting their story? And this is just creating opportunities. I would argue, how do we help people craft their story? We call this vocational design in what we're doing, but it's basically creating communal, relational, and individual opportunities or space to reflect on the past, present, and future. So in any space, are you asking people to think about the future? Are you asking them to reflect on the past? Are you asking them to get intentional in the moment? And so this is the end of my story here, as you can see. You know, I did the Stanford thing, Harvard thing, the BC thing. I can't even tell you what I'm going to be doing a year from now, because purpose is about heading in the right direction, even if you don't know exactly where you're going. But when we look at my story here, these inflection points, it was people, right? It was people that I met for good or bad that changed the trajectory. And then it was experiences. It was the Cotter Club. It was the social work program. It was summer search. It was these experiences. Why are people and experiences so important? Because it caused me to actively reflect in my life in a different way. For good or bad, people and experiences cause me to think about myself and the world in a different way. And really, when it comes down to purpose, at its simplest, the more we intentionally think about our lives, the more purposeful they become. I know that sounds overly simplistic, but that's really what it is. And what gets us to think about our lives? People and experiences. And I'll just end here with, and those three things: meaningful relationships, these are the pillars, formative experiences, and active reflection. And so I just want to go through the power of relationships. Why do relationships matter? Well, alumni who have significant relationships with one or two professors over a 4 to 6 year period, twice as likely to say their college was very rewarding. One or two professors having a relationship with them. Alumni with 7 to 10 strong friendships, 3 times as likely to say it was a rewarding experience. And having supportive relationships doubles the odds of having your work feel meaningful. So 1, relationships drive outcomes for students in higher ed. 2, power of formative experiences. So this is from the National Association of College and Employers. What are employers looking for? All your students here now are like, I'm here to get a job, right? What are the things that employers are looking for on a resume? Up here, the highest one was internships. Second one was employment during college. Not even work study, but just did you work? They want to see, do you have the experiences to show your skill set? Look down at the bottom here on this stuff. That we're just saying experiences are more valued than academic content knowledge, especially in an age of ChatGPT where it's incredibly hard to figure out what people actually know. So And then Bates and Gallup, Bates College in Maine, who does purposeful work, they did a research study where they found that recent college graduates who said their work was purposeful were 10 times more likely to say they were thriving in their lives. 60% of recent college graduates who said their work was purposeful were thriving. Only 6% of students who said their work wasn't meaningful were also thriving in their life. I'm not here to say like go find your calling and it's all about work, but having meaningful work is the strongest indicator of thriving in your life. And then they look, so what are the parts of college that lead to finding your work meaningful? A mentor who encouraged them to pursue their dreams, aka a meaningful relationship. A project or program that allowed them to apply what they learned in the classroom to real life, aka formative experience. And then an experience or a class that helped them to think about their academics and try to connect the dots about how it applies to them, aka an opportunity for active reflection. So not only are these things good for purpose, but they lead to the outcomes that your administration and your school leaders are very attuned to right now. And so the final thing here, this just came out in January. They found that of young professionals, almost 40% said they were struggling with the mental health challenges of transitioning from college into the workforce. And almost 50% of them were saying they were experiencing burnout. What was interesting is that for students, young professionals who felt ready, they cited extracurriculars in college, aka formative experiences, and relationships they had with their peers, relationships, as the two most influential experiences that said they were ready. And as a clinical therapist who also is doing career services, this next part hurts, but it says these factors outpaced mental health counseling and career services. So really doesn't matter where you're getting it. It's what drives outcomes for colleges. And so the last thing I'll say about this is this, leading with purpose and belonging, creating the space to do this work. I call it proactive mental health support. Because I'm a clinical therapist. I'd love every person to have a clinical therapist if they need it. That's never going to happen, right? And you all don't want to be mental health therapists either. That's not your job. But so the more people can feel connected, feel like they're having formative experiences, creating space to think about their lives, that is a proactive response where it's not going to lead to so much depression and anxiety. And it's a proactive way that we can be supporting the well-being. I'm just going to go. Last thing, I'll leave it here. I'm going to leave you with two things. So we did the strengths that you wanted to be. And so the last part here is how can you be present? How can you start acting today? What's one thing you can be doing to start using those strengths you identified to become that person you want to be? You don't have to wait. So one, I created some challenges for you that you could be doing. Well, these are the personal challenges. I'll send this slide. Okay. I'll send it here. These are some challenges you could be doing right now to intentionally be using your strengths. Okay. And so save this if you want. Also, because this is an ed tech conference, and I know we're all about generative technology, I've created a program for you where you can go in and choose the strengths you want to be practicing. Choose, do I want to be doing this at home, in work? You can choose the outcome. Do I want to be doing this for positive emotions, better relationships, sense of accomplishment? And we're using generative technology. It's going to help you brainstorm different practices that you can be doing in less than 10 minutes to be intentionally using your strengths. So I'm over now. Thank you so much. I apologize. And so again, I just want to say the final thing is I genuinely want to thank you for all the work that you do, because in the research on mentoring, you are an essential dot on your student's journey. Like you might have one of your students be up here giving a talk like this today, where they're like, this person said this thing at this time, and it changed the trajectory of my life. And so you have this unbelievable role you're playing with your students. The challenging part, you're never going to know it. And that's because in mentoring, the impact of mentoring, planting that seed, we don't see it until on average a year later. And so thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for being a special dot on your students' journey. And just know you're having a very, very huge impact on students, even if you never see that before. So thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate it.